Good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives, and welcome to our premiere of McDuff and Nixon. Garland Nixon joining me tonight for a discussion of current events and bringing in some history and some political opinion on top of that, which I always enjoy because so far, whenever we started talking about these things, I felt a great synergy and a feeling of we're getting somewhere fast. And so I am anxious to continue the conversation with Garland Nixon. Welcome, Garland, and how are you doing tonight?
I am doing great. Wonderful to be back. We're looking forward to a lot of fun Mondays.
All right. Well, I've been catching up on your shows, and I really enjoy the perspective you bring to a lot of things. I had not at all expected to see you do a show on a pipeline on the Nord Stream 2, which I enjoyed watching today. What got you interested in that? And let's talk a little bit about that pipeline deal because of how important it is for us to really be focusing on energy as a cause of political strife, a cause of a NATO to want to put pressure on a Russia, for instance, and what's going on behind the scenes that is so important is, if not, the incredible cash flow that comes from control of pipelines for gas and oil. So fill us in on what you've been studying in regard to Nord Stream 2, and let's jump in from there.
Sure, this is a very important. This pipeline is very, very important for a number of reasons. So here's basically to sum it up. A lot of people don't know this. Russia provides about 1/3 of the natural gas for Northern Europe, Austria, Germany, and on up into Norway, Sweden, Finland, etc. Right? About 1/3 of the natural gas. And there's several pipelines, but one of the most important pipelines runs through Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is a country on Russia's border. But Russia has to pay Ukraine for transit. At times, Ukraine has been short of money, and they just siphon some off for themselves. So they haven't been the most able of stewards over this pipeline, let's just say. And meanwhile, the U.S., of course, in 2014 overthrew the government of Ukraine, and there's a U.S. puppet government there. So that's also can be problematic. Okay. Germany, meanwhile, is planning on getting away from traditional fossil fuel. They don't like the concept of nuclear. So they figured we'll go with gas. It's cleaner. We'll burn gas and we'll move towards maybe sustainable energy or whatever. That's the background on it. So they decide, let's do a pipeline directly from Russia to Germany, and some Russian companies, some Austrian companies, et cetera, decide we're going to get this pipeline done. About $11.5 billion investment. Remember, Germany approached Russia about this. It was kind of everybody agreed it needed to be done at any rate. Okay, so this happens. Well, here's what's going on with it. It's about 90% finished. It should be finished in April. But meanwhile, the U.S. says it looks at this about several parties in the EU, the more anti-Russia elements of the EU, and of course the U.S. started saying we don't think you should do this to Germany, and Germany said it's in our best interest. So basically, here's very important. This is very important. Germany determined as a sovereign nation that it was in their strategic interest to have this pipeline. So now the pressure comes. So the U.S. says don't do it. All these don't do it. Germany's like, no, we're an individual country. We'll do what we want. The U.S. then starts sanctioning Russian companies, sanctioning other companies, and threatening to sanction German companies. And Germany's like, wait a minute. Now, here's why that's important. Because one of the things you've heard me talk about is seeing the U.S. as an empire as opposed to as a nation. And an empire has only two kinds of countries that it's conquered and countries that it intends to conquer. And it puts bases most of the time in the countries that it's conquered, Germany being one of them. So Germany thought that they were an individual sovereign nation. The U.S. empire didn't see Germany as a sovereign nation. They saw them as a U.S. protectorate with bases there. And they said, basically, when we tell you don't do something, don't do it. So Germany is now really learning firsthand that the U.S. will not respect them to make their own independent decisions. And Germany starts pushing back. The Trump people are pushing back. The Trump people started saying they came up with a suite of sanctions that was going to go directly against Germany and German companies. And that would have been a real problem because, of course, now you're putting heavy sanctions on an ally. So what happens? Germany, I guess, at some point decides no matter what the U.S. does, we're going to do it. And so here's the funny dynamic. Now you've got Germany and Russia allied for this project against the U.S. empire. So that isn't good. Let me add one other thing, and I think this is the most important part. And this is why, well, two things. Number one, because Ukraine is basically a vassal state. It's really a state that's run by the U.S. government. I mean, it's not even a vassal state. We run their government, basically. So they're going to get hurt economically. That's part of it. But here's the other part that's important. Part of the existence of NATO is it's a military operation organization, is to protect the Germans and the Baltic states and Northern Europe, et cetera, from the Russians rushing across the border and just taking them over, right? If Germany and Russia are involved in this big $11.5 billion economic project, they're now economic partners, aren't they? So it's kind of hard to continue. It makes it more and more difficult to make this absurd argument that Russia's about to come across the border. That's what NATO, we're protecting you from Russia attacking. Russia's trying to do business with these economic businesses. So now when they get this really strong economic partnership together, I mean, who are you really going to be able to convince anymore? If you look at NATO, NATO's now saying we want more troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera. NATO's trying to expand to South America. Why? Because the argument, and they're saying China's a problem, but the argument that they're protecting Europe from the Russians is starting to become really absurd, because the only thing the Russians want really is economic partnerships. They're looking for their economic interest. Why? If they didn't attack, if when it was the Soviet Union, it was a huge, powerful entity. They didn't come across the border then. They're much smaller. Why would they come across the border now? It makes no sense. So now this is just going to be another nail in the coffin of NATO, and another reason that NATO has to really struggle to, explain and justify why this military entity needs to be based in Europe. Who the heck are they protecting them from? The other thing is this. So NATO is also saying, well, now China is a problem and we have to confront China. Can they make an argument that China is about to invade Europe? Certainly not. So NATO is now becoming an offensive military organization, not a defensive military organization. And I'll add one other thing. One of the reasons that you're seeing the U.S. enlist NATO troops, now more NATO troops are going to Iraq, more going to Afghanistan, et cetera. They're joining the U.S. Why is that? Because the U.S. is a declining empire. And now they're using NATO to supplement their military, just so people won't see how weak the U.S. is getting. It's weak, it's overextended, the wheels are coming off the cart at home, and it's trying to bring NATO into the mix so people won't see that the U.S. is overextended and it can't confront all the people that it wants to confront. It can't run the world and deal with the tragedies and disasters that are going on right here. And that's why Nord Stream 2 is so important. It is Germany and Russia versus the United States. So now how do you say that we're protecting protecting Germany from Russia?
Right. But also, I think what I would hasten to jump in here with is the difference between what President Trump was trying to do, which was to enforce the sovereignty of individual states, as opposed to what the Secretary of State was trying to do, that is Mike Pompeo, which is always to work along with the CIA and the what I call the deep state that's behind the facade that we see as the people in front of the government. My question about Trump may be, well, to what extent is he just ignorant, or to what extent is he tried honestly to figure it out, but just had people around him that were from the get-go going to keep him in the dark and not let him see what they're doing, because what really they were doing was acting like an empire, as you say, as opposed to following the will of the voters for Trump. And that's where I wanted to get to, was the 75 million people that voted for Trump. are now being tarred and feathered as if they belong to some kind of cult and must have gotten hypnotized in order to cast their votes. And I think that it's important that at some point the people that voted for Biden start respecting the fact that no, that's an awful lot of your fellow citizens that you're just turning into idiotic, brainless fools, which is probably not the case. And the reason there's so many people that did vote for Donald Trump was exactly what you described, is that we don't want to be an empire. We want to be a simple nation that respects sovereignty. That's what we grew up believing. We thought America is not going to go out and take other people's countries and destroy their government in order to make it easier for corporations to take the resources away from them. But that's what it has become. So this question of how do we restore people's belief in the United States as a force for good in the world? Are we now, the ugly Americans cast as ugly Americans forever, and that spells a very dark future for the country, because the country can't really withstand the billions of people that will ultimately oppose and try to bring it down if it keeps on having the. Sorry, my dog's barking. I don't know if you can hear Toto.
Yeah, that's not a problem.
But Toto gets mad sometimes when we talk about these empires. But where you see where I'm going with it is that we need to have I want somebody to vote for. I want somebody that I can say, yeah, I agree with that person, and they're running for office, and God darn it, I want that. So what my wish list is to restore sovereignty, rule of law, Constitution, and really make an incredible effort on a national basis to apply equal protection of the laws and due process, and to help the people in our country that so desperately need help. The idea that we're going to go out and fix some other country while our country is so desperately messed up is sickening. We don't need to be out there trying to fix them, and we're not. And as you pointed out, we might say, hey, we're out there with USAID. That means aid. That means we're going to help you. But what we're really going to do is we're going to fool you, and we're going to get some dictator to sign some papers, and suddenly all your forests are gone, all your animals are gone, and all your minerals are gone, and all your people are enslaved and working in the mines. Well, that's not what the American people want either. We don't want that. The only people that want that are the banks and the bankers that are extending all of these incredible loans. And when you bring in NATO, as far as I can see, the main function of NATO is enrichment of flag officers and officers in the highest ranks of NATO militaries, because they're setting up these deals, they're facilitating these pipelines, and they are making money hand over fist, in the back room. And sorry to say that, but that's my observation. I wish I was wrong.
Well, see, additionally with NATO, there's a couple of things. One of the things that's going on with NATO right now, a big part of the discussion is, and Trump started the discussion. Actually, Trump started the discussion. Again, there was a candidate that I really liked, that I really supported, and that was Tulsi Gabbard. I was a big Tulsi Gabbard fan because Tulsi Gabbard said what I wanted to hear. She said, number one, let's end the Cold War. It's dangerous to have a Cold War with these nuclear powers. Number two, let's end these endless wars and bring our troops home and spend the money on Americans. And you know what's interesting? For all the crap they give us about we've got to respect the troops, et cetera, right? When Tulsi Gabbard came out and said that, the whole machine came after her. I don't know if you remember the Washington Post, the New York Times, everything from Fox to MSNBC to but if I remember correctly, the only place she could get on was Fox. She couldn't even get on the rest of them. So, but the whole machine, the UK, the BBC, the whole Western machine went after Tulsi Gabbard, and that's who I really like. I make no bones about who I am. I was a Bernie fan, liked a lot of things about Bernie, but even when it comes to foreign policy, Bernie falls in line with some of the empire stuff too. But Tulsi was like, We are not going to spend all of our money overseas. We're going to spend it on the American people. And boy, they came after her and crushed her right now. That's the machine that we have. I don't think, to be quite honest, if you look at the history of empires, the British Empire stopped because the pound sterling crashed. And I think that's the U.S. I don't think, I think we got to, I'll put it like this. One could argue that if you look at like the last couple of years, if you look at the way our military power has waned, et cetera, one could argue that the U.S. has already kind of crashed and burned. I mean, people like you and I know it, that what bad a shape, that how bad a shape the United States are in. A lot of the people that are watching it here know that, you know, a lot, the condition we're in. When you mention the Biden voters and the people that think Biden's great and the resistance and the whole, if you're in, to me, establishment Democratic Party, establishment Republican Party, that's a big brainwashed group of people as far as I'm concerned right now. And they're looking, you know, at, as you said, there's 70 some million people that voted for Donald Trump, and they're just looking at this whole group in one little bunch. They just look at the most extreme person that they can find in any group and say the whole group's like that, right? And when these are just people. I have plenty of friends. I know plenty of people that voted for Trump. It's no big deal, but they're creating this really divisive dynamic, and it is really cult-like, because it's like, we're the good guys. We supported for Biden. Trump is evil. Everybody that has to do with him is evil. Anything that has to do with him is evil. Well, wait a minute. If they're all evil, then you can't work with them. You can't talk with them. You can't, you know, deal with them or address them, because they're just evil. You have to avoid them. And that turns into and we're hearing this, the terrorists, you know, now the crap that we heard. And that's why, you know, I've always been against this so-called war on terror, and they're going to go off to the Middle East and blow people up and fight for our freedom, etc. I've always been opposed to that, and I've always said it's a blatant lie, and it is illegal under international law. It's unethical. It's immoral. And here's one of the reasons, because there's a lot of people I know who were like, oh no, we've got to go invade whatever country, blow whoever they think is the latest bad guy up. But here's what I always know. And I put it like this. Look, and you might have heard this analogy before. If there's a guy that goes to the bar and gets drunk and gets in a fight, then on the way home, he gets in an argument at a stoplight with some guy in another car, and he gets in a fight. Then he gets out, he's walking up the street, he sees the mailman or whoever, he gets in a fight. Here's a person who gets in a lot of fights. When he comes home, you know what he's going to do with his wife and kids? He's probably going to be physical and beat them up, beat the crap out of them. Why? This is a person with a violent nature. You're not going to find a person who's violent in the streets, but then when he gets home, he's as gentle as a lamb. Or the opposite way around. Most of the time, people who tend to be physically violent tend to be physically violent. Here's where I'm going. The U.S. will not adhere to any international laws whatsoever. The U.S. won't say anything about Israel not adhering to any international laws. Recently, the International Criminal Court said they may look into some of the things that we did in Afghanistan, or some other countries in the U.S. said we're going to sanction the judges, the investigators, everyone. So we will not adhere to international laws that we had signed on to. We signed on to the JCPOA as a country and backed out of it, right? So here's my point. Is it any surprise, in the same way that the guy goes to the bar and he gets in fights all the time, he's probably going to be violent when he gets home? Is there any surprise that when the leaders of our country will not keep the written agreements that they have around the world with other countries? Do you think does anybody here think that they're going to come home and keep the written agreements that they have with us? They're not. They have no care whatsoever for their word, no integrity whatsoever to say, we signed a deal with this country, we got to keep this deal. We signed on to this international rule that we won't use whatever it is, fragment bombs. If you're going to use fragment bombs, I'm against war or whatever, don't sign a deal. But if you sign an agreement that you won't do it, and then you go do it, and then you say, and if anyone tries to hold us accountable, we'll sanction them, right? What are they doing here? They have an agreement with us. It's called the Constitution. They could care less about the Constitution, care less. I argued the Trump impeachment. One of the reasons that I opposed it was First Amendment. That based on what Trump said, fight like hell, etc., from a First Amendment, that was constitutionally protected speech. And I think it would win in court to argue that was constitutionally protected speech. I'm pretty sure that would probably, if the Supreme Court even took it up, if that was a charge with somebody, can tell you that's constitutionally. So the people that impeach Donald Trump could care less whether or not it was. They were going after Trump, and that's what we're dealing with. We've been dealing with this for many years. This isn't new, but so that's my point. You Americans. The problem is Americans separate um, foreign policy from domestic policy. The only separation is grammatical. We use different words, but if we use the traditional metaphors, government is family. George Washington was the father of our country. We're sending our sons and daughters to war. That metaphor of the government is a family, right? If we're using that, then old dad ain't nobody in the street can trust him. You can't trust him at home. He doesn't keep his word out there. He ain't keeping his word here. And so Americans have to understand, to me, you cannot ever fix it here until you get a leadership of a country that respects international law, that respects their word. You know what I mean, John? People who you can't keep their word. If they say, can I borrow $20? If you're going to give them $20, give them the 20. But they ain't never paying you back. And you can't respect their word. Well, if you can't respect that person's word out in the street, you can't inspect it. And that's what I see of the United States. That's why I tell people who are so focused on domestic policy, you have to pay attention to foreign policy, because the only difference between the two is in our minds and in our words. It's the same people doing the same exact things. And now let me add one more thing. And this domestic terrorism stuff, Avril Haines, DNI director, said, you know what? Now the terrorism that was ISIS, but now it's at home. So now they're going to bring the same tactics that they used in the war on terror against these poor schmucks in these poor countries. They're going to bring it at home. Again, it supports what I'm saying about the all being one policy.
Sure. And what I suspect, and I hate to say it, but I suspect that the whole January 6th thing was exactly that type of a deal, where you had the military intelligence people come up with this Q thing, and they got thousands of people fired up about we got to go to the Capitol, and the president says go to the Capitol, and so they went. And what was that? Maybe all it was just a great doxing. If they've got everybody's pictures now. They've got, everybody's got a name, and they've got, their phone numbers, and they've got a dossier on all of those 2 million people that showed up. Maybe that was the whole point, was to get those people, the most active, the ones that are most likely to support a movement towards nationalism or restoration of sovereignty, which I think that's what MAGA really represents. And to just dox them, to get them on the list with the helicopters and the high tech cameras. With regard to the way to try to go forward, Tulsi Gabbard to me was saying things very much like, I like that. I like that so much. And she's so attractive. And then I realized she has a military background. And then I start thinking, oh no, maybe this is another Pied Piper that they're going to put in front of us and lead us, say all the good things like a Bernie, and then at the last minute, they pull the rug out from underneath of Bernie. Is that same type of thing going to happen? I don't know. I don't have enough faith anymore in believing just because somebody says something that they sound like a good person, that they look like a good person, that I really, really want to believe in them. But I'm so I'm so turned off by things, like Obama. To me, Obama. I mean, I loved Obama. I thought Obama was the best thing that hit the country ever, and I was so enthusiastic. Worked for his campaign and did all kinds of stuff but it wasn't too long before we started to realize he's not going to do anything. He can't do anything. That's the trouble. What we as a people are a good people. We are the kind of people that want to respect the rights of other people around the world. But our government has this reputation as around the world of the bad daddy, the guy that's going to come home drunk and beat up the kids. And if that's where we're going to live with that reputation, then the country's not going to survive. How can we turn this around? Because one of the things I've been working on is reading books that I think are helpful to understand both the struggles that we've had to go through to maintain the thread of democracy, and also the positive side of what the really good message of America has been ever since, the mythical Plymouth Rock and all of the first attempt to create a nation based upon human rights and respect for one another and participation in government and due process and all of those things that were kind of in the compact that they tried to govern themselves with. And the history from there, where it's taken an awful lot of struggle to get to the point where we're right now can even have this free a conversation between us and do it in public in such a way that other people can hear it. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what bothers me is that a lot of people might just think, well, it's just too far gone. We can't fix it. This country is just out, And so let's bring it down and let's start over. And that, I'm afraid, is playing right into the hands of the big banks that have been shaking our foundations ever since World War II.
Yeah, a couple of things I think, and that is that I don't know, bad news, good news, whatever. That's not the news is, I think, we are sealing the end of the empire economically with sanctions. I really think so. I think the U.S. is out of control. It's kind of, it's funny. I don't know. Let me ask you this, John. When you look at what our government's doing here, when you look at, like, we're throwing sanctions, it's like, hey, no, some country over there, we're sanctioning them. Well, this country over there is doing so. We don't even know. Sanction them too. Sanction people, sanction everything. We just throw sanctions around. Am I the only one? Doesn't it kind of seem like things are spinning out of control here? Like the government, particularly in foreign policy, is it just me, or does it seem like the foreign policy now is just spun, is drifting? You can't look at it and say, well, the U.S. is trying to do this or this or that. It's like, we're going to confront China. We've got to deal with Afghanistan, more troops to Syria. Venezuela, they're doing something. And you're like, whoa, without time out. We got people in Texas who don't have water. You know what I mean? We've got people in parts of the country who don't have food. We've got things that are happening. They're the ones who shut down who did the shutdowns, caused a lot of businesses to die. And I think there's a responsibility to address that, because that's a decision they made. I mean, this is not a show to discuss whether or not that's the right thing or not right now, but that was the decision they made. And because of that, there are people suffering. And we don't want to hear, well, we got to do this in Venezuela, Syria, China, the South China Sea, whatever, So I think what's happening, what's going down is this. This is the way I see it. The dollar is the reserve currency around the world, and it allows the U.S. to have a lot of control over the flow of money around the world. And it also allows us to print money, because most country, your money it's in your country, your dollar, and this is the whatever Canadian dollar is spent in Canada. And if you print a whole bunch of Canadian dollars, they got nowhere to go. So you're going to get inflation. The U.S. has been able to get by that because the U.S. is a reserve currency. The U.S. prints more money. It can kind of dissipate somewhat out into the world. Keep in mind, we're still like $30 trillion in debt. People kind of forget that. But in the immediacy, at least, you don't feel those immediate, hits from inflation. Whereas, because we're sanctioning everybody in the world, China's coming up with the digital currency of their own, and they're starting to do some interesting things with it. So you've got Bitcoin going through the roof. You've got these several countries coming up with digital currencies, and they're going to replace the reserve currency. We are creating an environment, because we're sanctioning everybody, where right now, if you were pick a country, France, Brussels, whatever, right? And you were starting a business, wouldn't you want to start that business in a way that it wasn't in any way tied to the US dollar and the US currency? Because you start a business, you're in France and you're doing business in Portugal, whatever, and you've got a strong business going and you're making money. At any given day, if the U.S. gets mad at Portugal, boom, we got sanctions on Portugal. Nobody can do business with Portugal. You're out of business, right? So you want to make sure that your business is not within the realm of that dollar currency. That's what people are doing, which means at some point, the dollar is no longer the reserve currency. At some point, the dollar's been dropping now. A lot of people argue it could crash within the next year. So What happens? Two things come together. We're overextended. We got to be all over the world, running the world. Now we're begging NATO to help us, so we can still look tough, even though we're not as tough as we used to be. And we're sanctioning everybody, and people are running like scalded dogs away from the dollar. Those two things are going to come together. People aren't going to want the dollar. They're going to have options in digital currency. We're going to be overextended. And the same thing's going to happen to us that happened to Britain, that happened to so many empires before, is an economic crash. Part of a lot of people, if you we have a mythology of what happened with the Soviet Union in the U.S. Reagan said, "Chain down the wall," and the wall fell, blah blah blah. Kind of like a biblical thing where he tooted a horn or something and Jericho's walls fell down. One of those kinds of things. That's the mythology. The truth of what happened is far different from that in Russia. Part of what happened was the Russian people were getting really pissed because they're like, wait a minute, we got all these satellite countries. And why is it that we're Russians and all the satellite countries got better schools than us? And even though they weren't really better, but they felt like we're Russians. And they're like getting all this stuff that we can't get anymore. This is not good. And it was kind of a lot of, and at some point, the Russian government was kind of like, we can't really afford all of these satellites. It kind of voluntarily dissolved. So the story of what happened with the Soviet Union isn't quite as exciting as we as Americans would like it to be. It was a lot more boring than that. My point being this. And they weren't overextended all around the world. Like the furthest they went was like Afghanistan. They weren't like on this side of the world trying to invade 20 different countries like we are. When our money goes flat, and in the next 5 years it will, there will not be a choice in what happens to America. And that's the way empires fall. The only worrisome, troublesome thing is if we can get to that point before these idiots that run our country, and the Biden administration has brought in the idiots of all idiots when it comes to neocons, that they don't screw up and start a war with another nuclear power and get us nuked. If we're lucky enough that doesn't happen, it's just a matter of time before these sanctions and all of the overextension that we're doing catches up. And it's just like for people that watch this show, for people like friends of mine on Facebook and Twitter and all around that, like people that they would call us either idiots or deplorables, or me, God only knows what they'd call me. I'm on the left and I hate the party, but they got names for all of us. They hate us all. I guess we're domestic terrorists. I guess that's the name they're going to settle on, is domestic terrorists, so they can lock us up. But we who are on the outside of these two brainwashed cults can see it clearly. The establishment people are continuing to act like everything's fine. Have you noticed the Biden people? They're acting like everything's normal. Like, just another day. Let's go out and do what we've been doing. I sit there and I'm like, these people are crazier than I thought.
Well, you asked my opinion. And I say it's all about the financial system of the world. And it's not the US so much that's crashing as the world's financial system that's crashing. And
if I may, real quick, here's what I'll say. To me, you make a great point, but I got to add this. The two are inextricably linked. You know what I mean? That the US, New York, and London,
right.
What is it? And what in Germany? You know what I mean? Germany. What is it in Germany? Is it Berlin? Berlin, New York, and London are like the foundations of that house. So sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I think the what's going on right now is driven mainly by a combination of Wall Street, the City of London, and Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
You got to conclude Google and all of these, our hosts here at Facebook, they're all part of it. And because of that huge piles of money that they've put together by hook or by crook. And this is what you have to, it's the George Carlin thing, okay? There is a club and we're not in it. And it's two things about the club that you have to understand. First of all, it's purely Machiavellian.
Mm-hmm.
The things that you've described as being terrible, they think are good. Okay. It's purely Machiavellian. And secondly, once you're in it, you can't get out. The only way you get out is ugly. And that's what happens when somebody tries to do what you're saying, and that is to build an economy that is not based upon the existing financial system. and then you end up like Muammar Gaddafi, with a sword up your butt, and Hillary Clinton cackling about it, because you're not allowed to set up, your own economy based upon gold that you have. It's your gold, and you mint the gold, and you set it up, and it's like, holy moly! If we let that guy go, he's going to have a thriving economy. They're going to be able to build their own, high tech. They're going to be able to build their own internet. They're going to build their own spaceships, and they're going to be competing with us. And that's the last thing that we, the inside club, are going to allow. So we're just going to open up our prince, the prince, and say, what does the prince do? I said, oh, stick sword up butt of, Arab dictator, make sure everybody knows what happens if you don't play ball with the existing system. So it's at that point where if you buck the system, they'll do something terrible. They'll mess with your family. They'll send the mafia out on you. They will do whatever. In MS-13, it's like just a phone call away.
Are you familiar with the story about the Brazilian UN guy and John Bolton?
Are you talking about the man that was killed way back in the?
No, this was I think 2006. Anyone can go online and search. John Bolton was working under Condoleezza Rice, and the Brazilians. It was when Israel had attacked southern Lebanon. And there were a lot of countries trying to, work out a deal of, a ceasefire. And the Brazilian guy was one of them. He was their attaché to the UN, whatever, from Brazil. He said, and anybody can look this up, he said that John Bolton came to him and said, you have 24 hours to resign. We know where your family is. You have kids in New York City. So, I mean, while you and I say that, they're kind of like the mafia, et cetera. I mean, in reality, you are dead on the money. I mean, and the people who play in the same field as them of play, no, they really are. There you go. John Bolton reportedly threatened family of retired Brazilian diplomat in 2002. Yeah, that was just before the Iraq War. So you're right. And, if you look in history, let's face it, it doesn't take long to look at into the JFK murder and realize that they covered it up. The CIA covered it all up because they were involved. It just came out recently. I don't know if you know, information just came out, Malcolm X, that people can look this up. It just came out within the last week. A retired NYPD officer, when at his deathbed, left a death note, what I mean? Left the last written thing. And he said that he was part of the operation, basically, to take out Malcolm X, that they arrested Malcolm X's bodyguards a couple days beforehand, so his bodyguards wouldn't be there. So if you look through the 60s or whatever, and people think about this, well, they killed some guys in the Black Panthers, or they killed Malcolm X or whatever, right? And these were black guys. Here's the thing about it. Don't think for one second that the government, at the time, they saw them as a threat. They killed them. Today, if they see you as a threat, if they see me as a threat, you know what I mean? They won't differentiate, and what's his name? What's the guy's, was it Webb? The guy who did the research and wrote a book on Gary Webb, the CIA running drugs from Central America to the US, etc. He writes a book, and then he mysteriously shot himself in the head twice.
Yeah.
So, that's what concerns me about this domestic terrorism stuff and all, because they'll kill people. They will kill US citizens in a second.
And I think that's a great point that people can maybe take away from this show, is that we have got to understand that people don't act out of good sense or reason or logic, or because of their devotion to the country, or because they swore an oath. They act because they are in a position that if they don't follow what the narrative, and there's a narrative. If they don't follow the narrative, they're in danger of really bad results. It's a combination of high of high finance and mafia style enforcement tactics. And and about the dollar, because again, this is just responding as you invited my opinion. The dollar is the currency that is used for arms sales, for us to provide through NATO military services. And our country is basically now Big Mike, in the big, in this tight-fitting suit that just don't you don't mess with me, you mess with Big Mike, and the banks of the world, and this emanates primarily still from the City of London, and that's where I think that the British Empire is still very much in play, whether it's on paper an empire, behind the scenes it's a major financial empire. It's the City of London, and that is what is controlling the economies in such a way that as long as we keep doing the military stuff for them, as long as we keep providing the muscle, they're going to allow our dollar to keep floating. But we owe so much on that dollar right now that 25-30 trillion dollars is so impossible for us to ever refinance. Hey, could I find it? I'd like to go refinance my debt. How much is it? 25 trillion. Oh, okay, sure. Let me lend you 50 trillion, and then you can pay it off with 2% interest. Would you like that? Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen. We are not going to refinance our way out of this. So in a way, they got us. They got us in the sense of we have to do what they're doing, or else they can just pull the rug right out from under our economy, and those dollars will start looking a lot more like wallpaper than they do like money.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And the thing about it is, they're just spending endlessly. And, the thing about it is, if the environment, if the financial environment remained what it is right now forever, they could get away with it. But I think everybody recognizes now that it is not. They can get away with it because they've got the steering wheel, like you said, between the U.S. and between U.S. and London. They have the economic steering wheel for the world, so they can do that. Now, at this point, by somewhere between 2026 and 2028, China will have the same, will be equal to the U.S.'s economy, somewhere around that. Well, if they're going to be equal then, and they're still growing, they're going to pass us by. And what's going to happen when they grow equal, when they pass us by, that US dollar, they'll be able to determine what it is, whether it's the yuan, whether it's the digital currency, et cetera. And the US has been very aggressive towards China. They're not going to be in a good mood to keep us in good. They're probably going to take see us as a threat, and validly so. Here's the truth. Right now, China is building to be an economic power, and the U.S. is executing the Wolfowitz Doctrine. If anyone looks up the Wolfowitz Doctrine, I'll sum it up. We got to be the most powerful country in the world forever, and we'll do whatever we need to stop anybody else from challenging us. That's paraphrasing it. That sums it all up. That's the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and the U.S. is trying to execute that. But here's the fact of the matter. You can't do that forever. History says every country that's ever tried to do it has failed. Although some countries have been able to get to that. Some empires have lasted for, hundreds and hundreds of years. That ain't happening with us. You know what I mean? Mainly because the reason why did we become an empire after World War II? Well, because Asia was pretty much devastated and flat from war. China was pretty much devastated and flat. Japan was, right? We didn't really have any competition. We had 50, 60 years without much competition. As things changed, as technology changed, as our oligarchs got, and here's the big thing that happened to China. Our oligarchs got greedy and said, whoa, China, you are willing to open all that labor up to us? China said, okay, sure. All right, good. We'll close all our factories in France and Germany and England and the US, and we'll take all of our work there for you and screw all of them. We'll make more money. That's real. That's how China grew so fast. Our oligarchs grew China. China didn't do anything specific. It was a very poor, large country. They had a lot of resources, but they had no money. And now, because they were fairly intelligent, and the US has been at war constantly. I don't remember the last war China was in. Does anybody, was it even in our lifetime? We're spending $740 billion a year, and they're up way up from where they were. They're at 260, $3 billion. Russia, look at, here's another thing about Russia. Before the pandemic started, Russia had enough money in reserve to pay off all of their debt, both public and private, and still had money left over for all the crap that our politicians talk about in the US about being conservative or fiscally conservative. There's none of that. They're only fiscally conservative. I'll put it like this. Our government is fiscally conservative when it comes to doing anything for the working class or the poor. When it comes to spending money on space, on military, on anything like that, on their cronies, the sky's the limit. Russia really is a fairly conservative country. Economically, they're fairly conservative. Militarily, what do they got? 3 bases? When's the last time they really invaded anybody? We're invading somebody every other week. So it's one of the reasons I think, and I'm not a conservative, but if you're honest about it, Russia is in the tradition of conservatism, a fairly conservative country, socially and economically, and particularly economically. So what do? They save their money and they do things like buy gold. And now they're not in as bad a shape as we are. So the bottom line is our profligate spending and our foolish running around the world trying to be the world policeman is catching up with us. And so I think what people should do, instead of trying to, I'm not going to use the word bring the system down, to change the system in a way that it benefits us, I think people should start preparing for the time and start acting and moving in the direction of the policies that they feel are important, so that as this thing falls, which all empires do, and we look like we're within less than 5 years of really fall, and hope it's not too precipitous, but as this thing starts to change, that we as Americans who love our country, whether we left, right, etc., those of us with integrity who want to see fairness and believe in the Constitution, will be able to get some people in there who are aligned with us, and we can get past this oligarchy.
Well, let me just jump right on top of that and add my own thoughts. I think that we need to look at the banking problem, and that this is the thing that perhaps can solve it all, and it's going to take a lot of courage, because what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to negotiate with the banks, and the ones that have failed. See, this is the pressure for them to suck money out of us, whether it's through the Paris Accords or through big pharma or through, vaccines, or through some kind of foreign aid program that turns into a nightmare. The idea is that the banks, all of this debt creates interest payments that have to be paid, and they can't keep up with the interest payments of one billionaire owes another billionaire a bunch of, I owe you $1 million every day, and I've got to find it. And where am I going to get it? And they've financed everything. So this is why, the Paris Accord, the carbon credits thing, is basically financing the energy production of the world through a tax scheme called carbon credits. And if they can get us to buy into this carbon credit scheme, then they've created basically a whole new form of currency that can be traded. And once you can trade something, well, you can borrow against it. And if you can borrow against it, then you can create that fractional reserve bump that everybody gets when you lend money out there 10 times. You've only got $1 and you lend it out 10 times. That's fractional reserve banking. That's where we get into this trouble, because it turns into too much interest owed cumulatively. Even if the individuals might not be bankrupt, but the system doesn't have any other ways to get money. And that's why they turn to things like the Paris Accords and tell us, we've got to save the environment by creating this carbon tax thing. That's just one example of how they've been striving to pull money out of us, when what we have to do is stand up and say, no, we're not going to do it anymore. You guys are the ones that are overextended, not us. We, the American people, are not overextended. We have full faith and credit, but we didn't sign up for all of this, $30 trillion that suddenly we were supposed to be paid on the backs of our great grandchildren. That's not fair. I mean, I'd rather just plain declare a jubilee and walk away from everything. I really would. But if we can't do that, then at least let's put those old institutions. Let's take Deutsche Bank. Let's take Chase Manhattan. Let's take the Bank of England and Barclays and all of these dinosaurs of financial institutions and break them down and get them under control, so that instead of being controlled by bankers, the bankers are controlled by us. And to turn that around and make banking and corporate law generally to be the servant of we the people has got to be the only way that we can restore a republic, the American dream has got to be built upon the good of we the people and not the good of we the bankers. And it's going to take courage, and it's going to take new politicians. And people I've got to look at my congressman whose name is Steny Hoyer and say, what can we do? Do we have to live with Steny until he's 100, or because he's so powerful, he's the majority leader and all this stuff. But I don't like his policies. I'd like to get rid of him, but you can't get rid of a dinosaur like that. Sorry, Steny, but my friend, your day is over. But people like that are never going to stand up to the banks. That's where I think the problem is. We got to, once again, I think drain the swamp is the mission, and so far we've failed, but we got to keep trying.
Well, here's the thing too. And that's why you are hitting the nail on the head when it comes to the issue of the banks, because they've taken over our society. Right. They are now, we were an agrarian society. We moved to an industrial society, then kind of an industrial and services society, right? And now we're a financialized society. We don't make things the way they make. One of the reasons, now talking about student debt and forgiving student debt, one of the reasons Biden ain't forgiving student debt, or what do they call them? Student loan asset-backed securities. They're called slabs. What is that? And this is what they do in on Wall Street. So there's all these student loans, however many, $1 trillion. So let's say they take $100 billion or $1 billion worth of student loans. They stack them all together and they slice them into slices, and they give each one of those slices a name. And they say, you can buy a part of one of the slices of these loans. And as these loans come in and the interest comes, you'll get dividends off of that. You'll get, right? So now these student loans, which would normally just be a loan, that's all it is. You buy a car, there's the loan. Now, when you buy a car, you buy something, they take the loans, that and 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, however many loans, they don't care if they're good, bad, or indifferent loans. They give them. Why? Because they're going to stack them all together, and then they're going to slice them up and call them whatever asset-backed securities. But they're not really backed by anything, but it's something else they can sell. It's like saying we're going to call them abracadabra, booga booga backed securities, and we're going to sell them and people will buy them. They don't care if they sell them, and then you find some suckers that think they're worth more. And then they'll buy more of it, or now that you've bought some of these student loan asset-backed securities, you've bought some, but other people want them. So the value goes up. So you sell them to someone else and you're getting them based on the value. So now where people made ball bearings in a ball bearing factory, they made steel in a steel mill or whatever before, and we had a real economy. Now we got a bunch of eggheads on Wall Street creating some complex financial tool that in all truth, half the time, they don't even understand it themselves. They don't even know. They've cut something into so many pieces now and resold it as something else and packaged it and public relations it as something else. Half the stuff they're selling and buying on Wall Street, they don't really know what it is, and they don't even really know where the money's coming from to pay for it, if it is. And what do? They run it all aground till it crashes. They go to the U.S. government, and the government just reimburses them out. We call it a bailout. The government reimburses them all the money they just gambled away. Wouldn't it be great to be able to go to Las Vegas, to go up and take the worst gambles you possibly can all day long? And as soon as you lose, you go to the government, hold your hand out, and then they just fill your hands up, and you go back and get more money. That's so you're right. It's all about the banks and the yeah, it's funny. Another thing people might not know, Dodd-Frank. When Dodd-Frank went through, I remember I thought, oh, great, Dodd-Frank. Well, I guess they're doing a little something to hold the banks to accountable. Oh boy, Dodd-Frank. If Congress gives you a shirt, it's got a hole in it somewhere, right? What happened? What did Dodd-Frank do? Before, when there was a crash, the government had to talk about it. It had to go to Congress before they bailed out. Remember that? They had to vote and all that. Dodd-Frank made it automatic. So now people are like, there won't be another bailout because we'll stand up against it. No, there's been trillions of dollars of bailouts, and you can't stand up against it because now you don't know about it. Now Dodd-Frank made bailouts automatic policy from the government. So in hiding, they took this thing and they said, this is going to be regulations that will help to regulate Wall Street. And you know what? The same people who knew what it was, but they were in the government, and the conservatives who knew damn well what it was pretended to fight it. No, you guys better not do that, so help me. So they had this pretend pillow fight. Like some people were for it and some people were against it. And wouldn't you know, in the end, it got just enough votes to win. That's usually a sign that it was all a game. It got just enough votes to win. And the people that supposedly didn't like it, bang their, oh, darn, all is going to come to an end. But what they didn't tell people was that hidden down below in the bottom of this thing was eternal bailouts. You think the people that weren't fighting against it, so-called fighting against it, didn't know? They all knew it was all a game so they could set up eternal bailouts. And that's what we got from Dodd-Frank. And that's the way the game is played. So people have to learn, don't trust them on anything. Anything. When they tell you they're going to re-regulate, deregulate, it's all the same thing. It's how can we game the system so our billionaire donors can make more money and then we can leave. And then Barney Frank, so-called lefty for the little guy, he gets out. What does he do? He goes working for the big banks. Eric Cantor, Republican, conservative, second in charge. Oh, he's fighting. He's going to stand up. He's a conservative. What did Cantor do? As soon as he got out, he goes to work for a bank for $2 million. It's the same game. And we get caught up. Oh, I hate him. He's a lefty. He's a righty. They're on Capitol Hill getting paid. That's what they're doing.
Yeah. And anybody gets that much publicity has already been vetted, and they've got something on them, and they know that they're going to be able to control anybody right now that gets into Congress, and it's a shame. That's where we have to work, but we can't just say, hey, the system is corrupt and leave it there. We've got to spread the word. We've got to get the word out and say, not only is the system corrupt, but bad news, we are the ones that have to fix it. We can't just kick back and say, oh, this all's messed up. Don't even go there. Don't even bother with politics. I don't want to. I don't really want to do it, but I have to, and we all have to, because
you got to fight back. What's the point of being alive if you don't?
This country's the last best hope of mankind, as Lincoln said. I really do believe that is the mission of this country, is to preserve the rights of individuals and the ability of people to act with freedom and liberty and all the rights that we claim as Americans. It's not necessarily possible for us to go around the world and ensure that everybody has those rights. But we don't have to. We have our own country, and we have plenty of work to do at home, and to take care of the people that are really in need at home, without regard to race or color or any of that nonsense. If somebody's sick, heal them. If somebody's broke, bring them some dinner. That's
the money we've got. Why are those people in Texas who are starving and freezing? To me, the money that we'll spend like billions on stupid stuff. Well, they should right now be saying, where's the military transporting those water trucks in? These are American citizens. These are people that work and pay their taxes, and by no fault of their own, They're suffering. Where is the government now saying, I'm sending in water, I'm sending in food, I'm sending in MRI, I'm sending in this and that, I'm doing everything they should be doing. And it seems to me they're doing nothing.
Well, they're saying, look at this robot that we're sending to Mars,
Yeah.
And, great. I mean, congratulations. You sent a robot to Mars, but if you can do that, why can't you feed the hungry people in Texas? Why can't you feed the people at home? Why can't you give us a safety net that we can rely on when things get rough, like this storm when it hit us? We have got to raise hell, and what else can I say except for thank you, Garland, for another fascinating evening, and I think we've made some important points that hopefully people will take with them and talk about among their friends and spread the word that all is not lost, but it's only possible if we work together, to recognize, that yes, Machiavelli is running our foreign policy, and no, we can't let it go on this way. We've got to recognize it. We've got to do something about it. We've got to spread the word until there's enough knowledge that it has to stop on its own, because it'll just have to go crawl under a rock once everybody sees it.
One last thing I'll say, this will take about 30 seconds to tell this story. I love it about when you're trying to change things or do something. There's a guy comes down to the pier and there's this guy pushing against this ship. And a guy looks at him, he goes, what are you doing? You're never going to move that ship. That's absurd. And he says, I'm not trying to move the ship. He says, what are you doing? He says, I just like to push against it. I'm pushing it because I like to do it. I'm a ship pusher. It's what I do, right? I enjoy it. I don't care if it never moves. That's what I say. If you are trying to change things, if you're trying to act, if you're trying to make a better country, don't get frustrated if things aren't working fast enough. Do it because you like it. Do it because you enjoy it. Enjoy trying to educate people, trying to get information out, trying to make this place work. Whether you're successful in your lifetime, a lot of people have worked and they've passed away, and 5 years after they passed away, something happens and it's like 25 years later somebody writes a book. It was John O'Loughlin that changed the world. You never knew it. You laid down and died 25 years later. They've got statues to you around the world. You don't know who that could be. So all of us should do the best we can. Enjoy ourselves. Don't get mad. Enjoy trying to make a difference. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. It's going to happen eventually, but make sure you enjoy it and make sure you do everything you can. But don't shake your fist and get angry when things aren't moving fast enough. Just keep working hard and enjoy the camaraderie, whatever you want to call, enjoy the people that you meet and the things that you see and the new things that you learn. Make it exciting. That's what I think.
All right. Well said, and great advice for me. Sometimes I can get wrapped around my axle a little too much, my friend. So
you and me both. You watch my videos, I scream like a maniac sometimes. It's hard not to get passionate and angry at these people. They're nuts, and they're coming for us, it seems like.
they are coming to take you away. Ha ha.